I'm going to talk about the pixel that saved a life. And before I get into that, I'm sure we have a lot of people watching the rugby in Japan, supporting the Springboks. So we're looking forward to Sunday. And while I'm talking about Japan, we're all familiar with, or hopefully we're familiar with that tropical cyclone Hagibis that hit Japan during the World Cup, causing a lot of flooding. So we're going to look at a pixel that saved a life by generating a flood risk potential model. Great, so as I say, Japan experienced flooding, but it's not just in Japan, this is a global issue. In March this year, we had tropical cyclone Idai that hit Mozambique and also created a lot of flooding. Now we need to know what areas are going to be flooded. So we first have to look at data. This is an image of a 30 by 30 meter DSM, ALOS DSM from the Japanese Space Agency. And if we query this data, we can see, well, we know what the elevation is above sea level. And if you look at the coordinates quite carefully, you'll notice that that is where we are currently at the moment. So we're going to look at this area. Now, this is 1 pixel out of 3.5 million pixels that cover South Africa. And we need to process each one of those little pixels. So we're going to push those pixels through a model, and we're going to generate this flood risk potential model. Now, this is the result from that flood risk potential model. And what a flood risk potential model is, it's a simulation of water rise through natural drainage channels. And this would tell us what areas would be inundated with water if there was a sudden surge of water down these channels. So if we come back to Champagne Sports Resort, we can see this is the DSM covering the area. And we push that through the model, and we now start seeing where flooding could potentially happen if there was a surge of water in this area. Now we've taken data and we've turned it into information, but we want to take it further. How can we use this? How can we take it further? So what I've done is I've looked at the dwelling frame data set that we have. So this has got a point on every structure in South Africa. And we can overlay that with the data. So now we can start estimating where people are that might need aids, or who needs to be evacuated, or who should we go out to and say, well, we suggest you maybe move where you're living because you're in the path of potential flooding. So what I did with that then is I went from a national scale. And I said, well, how many of these structural points actually fall within this 1 meter simulated water rise across South Africa? And I broke it down by province, so we can see in the Northern Cape, 21% of dwellings fall within this 1 meter flood potential data set. And maybe more relevant to me is Gauteng at 9%. But this is not enough. So we know how many dwelling frames or dwellings fall within this 1 meter flood risk potential. But what is the population, the amount of people that are actually affected by this? So I went and I pulled the Stats SA data of provincial population, and I related back to the dwelling frames. So this is what it looks like in the end. So in the Northern Cape, which we had 21% of dwellings falling in this 1 meter flood risk potential, we can see it's actually a very small percentage of the population. Where with Gauteng, we only had 9%, but that 9% is very densely populated. So now we have an issue of, well, there's a lot of people that could actually be affected by this. So now we've created something more actionable. Now we know, okay, let's go and put some efforts into Gauteng, start evaluating where these, natural drainage channels are that could be flooded. So just to talk, wrap up what I've mentioned here, what we've done is we've taken a very simple data set, a DSM covering the whole of South Africa, and we've turned it into information by running it through a simple model. Now we know where areas could potentially be flooded. And we've taken that information and we've included additional data to it. So we took the dwelling frame. And now we have knowledge of where people are, who's affected by potential flooding in the future, or if there's a sudden surge of water. And now that we have that knowledge, we can turn it into wisdom and take action and actually start educating these people, moving these people, or set up response for when an incident does happen in the future. So my whole presentation was about how this little 30 meter by 30 meter pixel saved a life. Thank you.